Welcome to Simply Scripting. I'm your host, Dorex Delicioso. In the last 3 episodes, we've gone over a lot of the basics. It's pretty dry stuff, but it's needed for an understanding of how things work as we progress. We did a bit of code to get 2 objects to communicate, but that's about all. Well, that changes with this episode. From here on, we'll be focusing on building real-world applications that we can use to build a repository of scripts we can reuse. It's a waste of time to write new scripts from scratch each time. If I need to write a script based on giving inventory items, I just look up my give inventory script, maybe add my get avatar group name script to it. Add a few tweaks and it's done. Easy. So in this episode, we'll be creating a notecard reader script that you can use over and over again. We're going to make it in 3 different flavors, because there is no one size fits all. We'll start with a basic script, then we'll modify it to use states, and finally, we'll modify it to be used with linked messages so the notecard reading isn't even in your main script. Lots and lots of fun. So, let's get to it. You can follow along and end up with the complete working script, or you can get the script from my marketplace store and follow along that way. I'll add the link in the description also. Here we can see we've pulled in our standard template. Lots of comments and a few common elements. Not a lot, but we'll fill in what we need as we go on. A bit about reading note cards. When we go to read a note card, we don't actually do the reading ourselves. We make a request to read a note card line and pass it off to the script. Our script will go out and read the next line, and let us know when it's done. The trick here is when you request a line to be read, the script doesn't stop and wait for it. The next line of script is executed immediately. It's a little difficult to understand, but I'll explain as we go. This is a core concept in scripting, and the request method is used often. So when we touch the cube, we want it to read a note card. First thing we have to do is tell it what note card to read, and what line in the note card. We'll add 2 variables to keep track of the name and line number. Now, we assign values to these variables, but where? Since we touched the cube to start, maybe in the touch start event. Seems logical. We always want to segregate or encapsulate logical sections of our code to keep the script clean and easy to read. I like to remove as many lines from the event handlers as I can, and put them in their own well-named functions. So, we'll create a new function called readNoteCard. We'll add a parameter to let the function know what notecard to read. Then we can do the actual assignments inside the function. Here, we assign the global variable notecard name with the value we passed into our function. Since we're just starting to read the notecard, we start with the first line. Line 0. The only thing left is to execute the function. We'll put the function call in the touch start event, and give it a notecard name to read. Save our work, click the cube, and test it. Well, clicking the cube was pretty disappointing. Nothing happened. At least nothing we can see. We always like to have some visual positive feedback when we make changes. It lets us know those changes are working. We have a line of code we can add that will give us that visual feedback and satisfy us the script is working correctly. Down here in the debug function section, we have a tiny function called sayDebug. More great naming on my part. Not. sayDebug will output anything we pass to it to our local chat window. Well, it will output it, if, and only if, our constant doDebug is set to true up at the top. We leave this set to true so our script can tell us all sorts of information while we develop it. Then when it's done, we set doDebug to false, and all those messages go away. So let's add sayDebug to our readNoteCard function. Save, click, test. We now see that name we passed to our function is actually getting there, and our global variables are being set. Perfect. Recall, when I said earlier that when we read a note card, we make a request and the script will go out, get the notecard line and return it to us? Let's add that functionality now. First, since reading a notecard line seems like it should be its own function, we'll add a new function called readNextNotecardLine. We'll create 2 parameters for information we will pass to it. A parameter called name, to tell it what the note card name is, and one called line number, to tell it what line it should read next. Now comes the magic, at least the first part of the magic act. We add a function call to getNoteCardLine, passing it the note card name and line number. This function is the one that will go out and actually cause the next note card line to be read. I'll add just a bit more code in this function. I'll explain why in a bit. getNoteCardName returns a value when we call it. I want to return that value to whatever function called this one. I add a data type before the function name to show the script it will return a value for us. Then in the function, I simply tell the script to return the value received by the getNoteCard function. Before we forget, because I always do, we have to make a call to the readNextNoteCardLine function, otherwise, it's just orphaned and lonely. We need to get the first line of the note card, so we'll add a call to the readNextNoteCardLine inside the readNoteCard function. We add it there, because we know for sure the note card line number is set to read the first line. You might notice I added 2 plus signs after note card line in this call. The plus operator just adds 1 to the variable it's attached to. It increments it after it passes the value to our readNextNoteCardLine. And that's important to remember, it's just telling the script that the next line to read will be 1 more than the current line. That's the first half of the magic act. We told the script to go get us a note card line, and it will. But it has to have some way of letting us know when it's finished. To let us know the script has finished reading the note card line, we have something called a data server event handler. It looks intimidating, and the name doesn't help with that. But it's a pretty timid event handler. Just like the touch start event gets executed when you touch the cube, the data server event gets executed when the script has finished reading a note card line. Just like the touch start event passes us a parameter telling us how many people touched the cube, the data server event passes us 2 parameters. One is the text for the note card, the other is housekeeping stuff. Let's test it to prove we really do get a note card line back. We can add a say debug line inside the function and pass it the data parameter of the data server event. That should echo whatever data is being read to our local chat. There, we're all set to test our script and read a note card. Except I forgot to add a note card. Oh brother. So I'm just going to add a quick note card to our cube. I'll name it default, as that's the name the script is expecting, and I'll add some test data to it. Here's the contents of the note card. So, now comes the big test. We've saved our updates to the script, right? We've made sure there's no errors, right? Wonderful. Let's get clicking and see what happens. Love it when a plan comes together. Our say debug messages are showing us that we did in fact read the first note card line. Satisfaction. Time for a glass of wine. Oh, did I say that out loud? We've done good, so let's take a step back and make sure we really understand what's going on in the script. First, we touch the cube. That touch causes an event to be raised. The event is passed to our touch start event handler. All this happens in the background and we really don't need to worry about it, except to know it's going to happen. Once the touch start event handler is called, we call our own function readNoteCard, passing it the text for the note card name, default. Our readNoteCard function is executed and we set the global variables note card name and note card line. We then make a call to readNextNoteCardLine, passing it the note card name and the line number to read. Our readNextNoteCardLine function calls the Linden Labs getNoteCardLine, again, passing it the note card name and line number to read. Since there are no more script lines in this function, it returns control back to whoever called it. In this case, control is passed back to the readNoteCard function. With no additional lines of script to process in readNoteCard, control is passed back to whoever called it. In this case, control is passed back to the touch start event handler. Since there are no more lines of script to execute in the event handler, the whole process is finished. So how is the note card line read then? When we did the getNoteCardLine call, that put an event into the script's queue. When that event gets its turn, it goes out and does whatever it's made to do. Here, it reads the note card line. When it's finished, it could be a millisecond, or 3 seconds. It all depends on what we call lag in Second Life. But whenever it does get finished, it puts an event in the queue, a data server event. Eventually the data server event handler gets called. It sees our say debug line and writes the data to the local chat. No more lines to execute, so the whole thing is done. Pretty long explanation, I know, but it helps to know that things happen without us directly telling them to. We've read the first line, we're well on our way to reading the next one. We've learned that the data server event is the last thing to happen, and it returns our data to us. So how do we read the next line? There is no touch event or any other event left to process. We'll tell the data server event that instead of doing the say debug, we'll have it call a new function of our own. Since we'll have the notecard data, we'll call this new function process notecard data, and we can pass in the data from the data server event. Now, we can move our say debug function up into process notecard data, as it makes more sense to have it there. Right now, our processing of the notecard data just means putting it in local chat, but we'll be changing that. And, since we'll be changing it in a dedicated function, we won't have to worry about breaking any of our other code. Another good reason for encapsulation. So say debug is our processing, and we're ready to read the next notecard line. Well, this is where it gets really easy. We already have a function that will read the next notecard line for us, so we'll just make a call to that function. And we're all set up to read the next line, we just have to add the call to our new function in the data server event. But before we do this, a word of warning. We have a bug in our code. If you execute the code now, it will read the notecard, and it will read all the lines, and it will put them all in local chat. What it won't do is stop reading lines. Once it finishes reading our notecard lines, it will just keep trying to read again and again. Not a good situation, so here's how we fix it. When the data server realizes it has reached the end of the notecard, instead of returning a new line for us, it returns a special value. That value is called an end-of-file marker. EOF for short. It's the data server's way of signaling us we're read everything. So, we just have to check if the data returned is this EOF marker, and if it is, we'll stop reading. Pretty simple once you break it down. So we will add a conditional check to see if the value in data is the EOF flag. Conveniently, Linden Labs has supplied us with a special constant that is equal to the EOF marker. We don't have to, or care to, know what the value is. So we add the conditional statement, an if statement, and text if data is not equal to EOF. If it's not the EOF marker, we process the next line as always. If it is the EOF, we just quit doing anything. Now we can say, wonderful, it worked exactly like it was supposed to. We do see what seems like an extra line right at the end, no worries, we'll fix that up in short order. As scripters, we can never be sure the data we're getting from outside sources is going to be clean, well-formed data. If we let users change the notecard data, we have no idea what odd things may appear. So, we do what we can to check for errors on input. It really is a fool's errand, because there is no way to check for all possibilities. All we can check for is that the data is good, and throw out the rest. Often, data will have extra spaces at the beginning, or at the end. We can check for and remove this extra white space, as it's called, quite easily with one line of script. This function will remove spaces from the start, end, or both sides of a string. It takes in two parameters, a string holding our data, and a constant value telling it how to remove the white space. It returns our newly cleaned data to us. If we save and test now, we'll see that we still have the extra line at the end. It's there because there was an empty line in the notecard data. So the next step is to check and ignore any empty lines. We'll use the if statement to check if the number of characters in the line is greater than 0. If it is, the line has something in it, otherwise, we can ignore it. We don't always want to ignore empty lines, it depends on what we're doing with the data, but quite often, we don't want or need them. If we save and test now, we'll see that we don't have the extra line at the end. So we've seen where we can clean the incoming data. There are as many ways to clean data as there are data. One thing to be aware of is no matter what data you put in a note card, it will always be string data when we read it back. You may add numbers to a line such as 1.5. The value coming back won't be a float number, it will be a string type. If a float is needed, you'll have to do an explicit cast on it. We've come a long way in creating a reusable script, but there's a few tweaks we can do to make it rock solid. We'll look into those changes next. If we look back at our data server event handler, we can see that each line gets passed in the process notecard data call, right up until the end of file. Sometimes, when we process the data, we don't care about what happens after we've read it all. But, sometimes we do. Maybe our processing of the data is just accumulating values, and after they're all read, we want to do something else, maybe write out the accumulated values. That won't happen the way we have our code structured, so we'll change it. We'll add a new function whose only purpose is to do something after the file has been read. Post-processing. I think a good name would be end of notecard. But we know how well my naming is. We don't have anything to pass into this function, so we don't need any parameters for it. So, we have the function shell, now we just have to call it when we know it's end of file. We can update the data server handler to call our new function and it read the EOF marker. Perfect. Now we can add any process we need at EOF. We may not always need it, but we're trying to make reusable code here, so it's a nice to have. Since we're adding it, we'll add something to show us it's working. That whole visual confirmation thing again. Now, we can save, click, test. Wait, why 7 lines? If you recall, there were 5 lines of data, and 1 blank line. So that's 6, not 7. You'll also recall that every time a line is read, the notecard line global variable is updated to the next line number. So it will report back 1 more than we expect. Here's a fast fix for that. Remember the plus plus operator we used with notecard line? We put the plus plus, the increment operator, after the variable, so it would get increment after the variable was read. The minus minus operator, or decrement operator, is the opposite. It will decrement the variable by 1. Putting the decrement operator ahead of the variable means it will be decrement before the variable is read. The increment and decrement operators can each go on either side of a variable, depending on your needs. Little snippets of good stuff to make life easier. And yes, it does get easier. Thank God. So save, click, test. There we go, 6 lines as promised. Remember about 10 minutes ago? We were adding the read next notecard line function and I said it gets and returns a value? Well, now we're going to see why that value is important. If you were only ever to use this script as is, to only ever read one notecard, it would be fine. But, what happens if you're using one of the other multiples of functions that return data in the data server event? Our current data server code wouldn't be able to handle it. So, an upgrade is coming our way. Tech Talk. When you make a call to get notecard line, it will return a value for you. You don't care what the value is, that's the script's problem. But, we can use that value to make sure the data server code handles multiple tasks correctly. First, we'll need a global variable. Let's call it data request ID. Since read next notecard line is returning this value to each line that calls this function, we'll assign that value to our new variable. In process notecard line, we'll change the line to update the variable after the call. Process notecard data has the same call, so we'll do the same thing there. Finally, we'll update the data server code to use our new variable. Wait, what's happening here? Good question. Each call to get notecard line returns a specific value. That value is associated with that notecard line request for that notecard. The conditional statement, data request ID is equal to query ID, just checks that the code inside the if statement is intended for this notecard. If we were to have multiple functions that use the data server, we'd just ensure each had its own variable with a different name. Our data server event may look something similar to this. It's a bit confusing, I'll give you that, but it works, and it keeps our data safe. What happens if we're reading two note cards, and both have to be processed differently? Well, hell. We can add an additional safeguard in our code so each differently named note card gets processed differently. It starts to get complicated, but I'm sure you can follow the logic. It's not the only way we could handle multiple note cards, but it's one way. So, it seems to me we made quite a mess of our code in the last few minutes. I'm going to make a few changes to clean it up, then, we'll go over the changes together. I'm not adding any new logic, I'm just rearranging the code into their logical chunks. I hate messy code, and I hate lots of code in event handlers, so that's where I'll be making changes. I'm creating a new function, select notecard, so we can clean up the data server code. We'll add a string parameter called data, and we'll pass the data variable from the data server into our new function. Now, I can move the code from the data server into our new function, and replace it with a single line function call. Looking better already. Now, I'll get rid of some of the event handlers we're not using. Next, since we know our script works as expected, I can do one of two things. I can just turn off the say debug messages, or I can remove the function calls. I think I'll just turn it off for now. Finally, I'm going to add some descriptive comments to the code before I forget what's doing what. That usually takes 3 days. That does it for this episode. I'll put the code up on the screen in sections so you can easily see and copy it. If you'd rather, you can get the code for this episode, as well as the next two, all in one package from my marketplace store. As I mentioned earlier, we'll be making 3 versions of this code. I do hope you were able to follow along with me. If you have any questions or comments, drop them below or contact me in World. This is the point where I'm supposed to say like and subscribe for more. But I really do think you know that, and if you want to, you'll already have done it, and if you don't want to, saying it is just annoying. I truly do thank you for watching. My name is Dorex Delicioso, and I stand behind all my code. Bye for now.